Thank you, Ruben, and thank you to all of you that are watching online or here in the room and for taking some time to come and be a part of this conversation. And I suppose I should start this conversation with two quick things. One bit of housekeeping and a plug, because otherwise, what would I be here for? Which is to introduce a piece of research for you, which I hope you'll find useful. Last week, we launched at House 337 something called the AI Impact Report 2024, which is a study of 7,000 people around the world and how they're adopting the AI space. What do they feel about it? What do they know about it? And whether or not they trust it. And one of the big things that we learned was that 90% of people in the UK and the US have used some form of generative AI in the past 12 months. 90% in less than 2 years since ChatGPT came to the fore. But only 15% of them, did you know this, 15% could actually explain what it was. And so, John, I think other than wishing you a very happy birthday,
thank you.
Which I hope you'll forgive me for starting with that. I maybe would like to start our conversation just by setting some definitions because of that lack of understanding. We're here to have a little conversation about artificial intelligence and how it's going to change the world. But when we talk about AI, what do we actually mean by AI?
Well, thank you for the invitation. Delighted to be with you today. When we think about AI, we're thinking essentially of two very different things. The first is often called narrow AI, and then there is general AI. And a narrow AI system is a system that typically consists of a powerful computer, a large database, and an algorithm that filters through the database and does one thing that normally requires human intelligence. That's why it is called artificial intelligence. It simulates intelligence. It is not itself intelligent. And most of the AIs that are working at the moment that are actually in use are of that kind, narrow AI. The second, which is much more speculative and of course is the subject of science fiction and fantasy films and so on, but nevertheless has attracted interest from some very able scientists, is general AI. And that is trying to create something that could do everything that normally requires human intelligence, and to do it much better and much faster. And so we're in the realm of super intelligence, which some people are trying to produce in one of two ways. One is by enhancing human intelligence as it is at the moment, and the other is by saying, look, the problem with human intelligence is that it's biologically based. Why can't we get rid of the biology and start with something like silicon and therefore upload our memories, our capacities and so on, and have some kind of eternal existence? Now, that is not only the province of science writers. There are some very powerful intellects, including our Astronomer Royal, who take it seriously, and we may come on to that towards the end. But there are those two kinds, and there's a wonderful paper written some years ago by one of the pioneers of artificial intelligence, who happens to be a Christian. And it's got a lovely title, and it's this: The artificial in artificial intelligence is real. In other words, the word artificial in the expression artificial intelligence is real. And he says if people realized that, they wouldn't make the common mistake, because we use words like machine learning, machine intelligence, they all anthropomorphize the situation, and people come to think that we're dealing with real intelligences. So basically, that's it.
I think that's a really helpful distinction. The challenge, I suppose, though, with that artificialness in artificial is that that's also a challenge of perception. And to me, it feels like we're entering into a space with the world of AI, and particularly the space that many of the big companies that are producing this technology at the moment would call AI agents, where we will have forms of this intelligence, be it artificial by that definition, operating on the internet with some level of autonomy that, by all perception of those that are interacting with it, may deem it to be more than that artificial intelligence, that they would deem it to have some kind of level of reality. And it seems that we are entering into a space, as we've heard a little bit today about content creation and social media and the future of where that might go, that we are not far away from a time where nearly everything we see, read, digest, watch, and even the people we speak to via the medium of our screens, tablets, phones, where we won't be able to tell the difference between something that is human and something that is real. And when that becomes the case, as we've seen this week, that public discourse may become something that is very difficult for us to engage in, and it may have a manipulative effect. How are you thinking about how we as Christians show up in a space where that
Well, I agree
is
that
possible?
it's virtually inevitable that we're moving into that space. And it's not simply that this technology is blurring the distinction between humans and machinery. It's also blurring moral distinctions between truth and falsehood. And serious-minded people who are, for example, interested in the security of our country. There's one head of security at GCHQ said that in the end, we simply will not be able to tell the difference between truth and lies. And that creates deep moral problems, because the tendency to believe the machine is very strong in people, especially if it's an impressive machine. So people like ourselves who are Christians, I think, have our work cut out to try somehow to inject some sense into this space. Because once we lose a moral base and a base for ethics and for truth, then we are in a very dangerous situation indeed, and we're getting there very much faster than people would have thought 5 years ago.
Yeah, the decline of that shared value set seems to, for me at least, been accelerated in the past 5 years, and I can't imagine that AI hasn't had some level of impact on that already. Do you think that we're already seeing that breakdown, or is that
I think
always
we're
been the
seeing
case?
an erosion of the value set. And one of the things that's very important to remember, something I learned from C.S. Lewis many years ago, who was prescient, incidentally, and seeing the danger of allowing a small group of very bright scientists take control of the world, basically. He could see the issues with truth and so on. And he made the point that if you look at all the religions and philosophies in the world at the moment, you will find there is a common set of moral values, and they're very powerful. The respect for truth, the respect for life, and so on and so forth. And he points out in an appendix to his book that was written in 1940, The Abolition of Man, that in every single area he looked, philosophy, religion, whatever, he could find what we call the golden rule. Do unto others as you would they did to you. So it seems to me, therefore, sitting as a Christian, believing that those rules actually have a transcendent basis in God. But even if you don't believe that, there still is a basis for some sort of discussion with the secular world. And we don't want to give that up, because there are reasons that are not directly theological, which we can inject into the kind of thing that rises immediately, and that is, how do we program this technology with a value system that respects human life, etc., etc. And that raises a whole lot of even deeper moral questions, as you no doubt be aware.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously are concerned about regulation at the moment, and we're seeing governments around the world try and make moves towards that. We have the EU AI Act that's been passed. In the US, similar regulation. The UK may or may not get there on adopting similar things due to our recent divergence from, well, it seems collective wisdom, but you could also say the European Union. Sorry, I was going to not keep this political, but it's hard to not go there. But regulation seems to me to be a kind of a threefold problem. We're trying to regulate these big models. Governments are working with corporations to look at foundation models, to look at the application layer. Individual groups within vertical organizations, within industries. Here in the UK, we might think of people like Ofcom thinking about the broadcast space. But the thing that has struck me a lot for the past few months is that there's not very much being done at the consumer level, the individual level, and I would call it maybe the seatbelt problem. In the 80s, we had those great commercials, the Think campaign, you might remember,
Yes.
for those of you who live in the UK or know these ads that encouraged us to put our seatbelts on in the car because we had regulated the streets and we had put speed limits in and we had put seatbelts in the car, but we had to tell individuals to put them on. And it doesn't seem to me that many people are trying to do that.
But do you think that one of the reasons for that is that we are perhaps now, you and the second generation of people, particularly in the West, where there's no common shared value system? For centuries, we had a shared value system. And it seems to me that the dominant ethical notion, which is utilitarian, works very well. If you're dividing ice cream among children, you'd better make exactly the same amount for each child or you're in trouble.
Yes.
It works well provided you've equal centers of power.
Yes.
Now, as I look at the world today, there are several major power blocks. And it's interesting in light of the election in America just yesterday. And it's all very well saying, if you do that, I will. If everybody has equal power. But if one block gets all the power, and I say, if you do that, I will, you'll do what? And that's why historically, people like Hitler made treaties when they were in their political infancy. But once they got the power, they just tore them up. And that's the thing I fear, that the utilitarian thing that works very well with equal centers of power won't be enough because it has no transcendent base. And we've got to plead, I think, for a transcendent element in all our dealings. And of course, that is pretty difficult because we have shifted in this part of the world anyway, from a dominant theism to a dominant, atheism, agnosticism. But in the science world where I am, the dominant philosophy is materialism. And we all, I hope, know where that leads. So we've got a huge problem there. And even in the practical sense, you talk about seatbelt. Every CEO of a company knows it's one thing to have a value and mission statement on the wall of your boardroom. It's another thing to get it into the hearts of your executives, let alone everybody else. But you know more about that.
Well, I mean, yes, I think in some respects that is the challenge of all of us understanding the value of our own data, and I think seeing our expression of ourselves that we've been so concerned about for decades, and throughout Christian discourse, we've always valued the words that we speak because they are, we believe, spiritually imbued, and they have the means of moving mountains. To use that language, but when it comes to our digital expression of that same speech, we seem to have given so little value towards that in terms of we heard earlier that even the way in which TikTok and some of these algorithms are looking at our facial expressions and our expression physically and also in the written word, we seem to have devalued that. Why have we devalued the speech of people in this age?
Whether it's answering your question or not, that's one of the aspects of this that really concerns me, is in the realm of surveillance technology, where AI is being used all the time. And it's wonderful to have a police force that can use facial recognition to pick out a terrorist in a crowd. But when you see the way some minority peoples are being suppressed in the world, like the Uyghurs in China, you get surveillance technology that's unbelievably sophisticated and can recognize me not simply from my face, but from my back, from the way I walk, and is being used intrusively. We've got this huge dilemma between how secure do you want to be, how much privacy are you going to give up for that security? Now, from where you sit, what is the seatbelt that we need to fasten, to use your own metaphor?
Well, it's a good question. The privacy value, you said earlier, is we seem to have no shared value. The one thing that comes up when I speak to people about artificial intelligence, if I was to ask all of you in this room, how much do you value your own privacy? would you raise your hand? Do you value your own privacy? Do you want to get private? And yet, our behavior online completely runs counter to that desire for privacy. But it does seem to be the one shared value that people seem to agree on is, yes, I want things to be kept private. I'm not sure that that's necessarily a right that we are given, because we believe in a creator that watches us wherever we are, don't
Yes,
we?
that's right.
So I'm not sure how we hold a value of privacy that highly. But to answer the question more directly, yes, I think we do have some things that we can do too, which is to actually take responsibility for our own use of these tools. And as was shared this morning, when it comes to the use of social media, for some of us, that may be just putting it down and not using it anymore. We may have to take more drastic action.
But perhaps it also might mean, and I'm very conscious of the danger of being accused of being a Luddite.
Yes.
You know, there's a chap out there and he doesn't believe in technology, even though he's got an iPad here, there's a screen there. That accusation I want to refute, and I often say to audiences where there are a number of Christians present, I actively encourage Christians who are scientifically trained to go into these fields, to have a right to sit at the table where the programming goes on, the ethical programming that's necessary for self-driving cars, for automated weapons, for a whole range of things, medicines, new medicines and their development, so that we do have informed people sitting at the table with a right to inject something into it. So if you're in that direction, I certainly encourage you to do that. And there's some wonderful examples of Christians leading in the AI field, like Rosalind Pickard of MIT, who's using the facial recognition technology to develop smartwatches that recognize if a child is about to have a seizure, and it's saving people's lives. That's marvelous stuff, and there are lots of other examples. So please don't go away thinking I'm against the technology. I mean, I use ChatGPT to write all these answers after all.
He's doing it now. You can't see the implant. We'll come to implants in just a moment, but I just want to kind of pull on that thread a little bit more. Charlie Munger, who's the Warren Buffett's kind of right-hand man at Berkshire Hathaway, has this amazing quote, which is, if you want to understand a system, show me the incentives. And it seems to me that the incentives for anyone to go into these large companies at the moment and try and shift that needle, to move, as you said, that center of power, possibly back towards a more Christian ethical worldview, it seems there's not a lot of incentive for that at the moment, because we want these AIs to balance the difference between freedom of speech at one end, where you could say anything regardless of the offence that you cause, and also protect people at the other end from harms that these things may cause.
Yes,
where's the incentive?
And that creates a tension that silences many people, because they get so afraid of saying something wrong that they say nothing at all. And that is a huge danger. And keeping that balance, gaining a credibility in our world, at the same time as being prepared to stand for truth and doing it with respect, but doing it, I think, is one of the most important things. And the Apostle Paul, if he were here, I think would be encouraging us, yes, speak the truth, but do it in love, and show people that you value them. And in my life, that's been one of the most important lessons to learn. I learned it from my parents, that you value people even if they diametrically disagree with you and would like to wipe you out of existence. That there's a lot of need for moral fiber, but I fear the way things are going, that people will increasingly in the West begin to suffer for it. It won't be done without cost.
No, to learn to kind of disagree agreeably, or agree disagreeably, seems to be the tension that we kind of sit with at the moment. I want to, conscious of time, I want to also move us to maybe think a little bit about the future, because this day is taglined Future Now. You mentioned the Apostle Paul. He talks that one of my favourite verses, this idea, in some translations it's seen as we see through the glass darkly, or I think that reminds me of a Black Mirror at the same time, but I don't think that was his intention. But we try and kind of predict where the future will go, but we really only have today and where things are now to truly use as a barometer for it. One of the things that you've spoken out a lot about, and I think is a concern for many, is this subject of transhumanism and human augmentation through technology. You know, I'm wearing a pair of glasses. We saw a suit earlier where cameras and AR and an assistant in my ear can talk to me and give me assistance.
That's why you see through the glass darkly.
Yes. yeah, the transition lenses are coming in. But we do worry that there is a line. Well, maybe that's my question. Is there a line? At what point do we cross from technology being assistive into being somehow taking away something that's uniquely human about us?
That's a very hard question to answer.
That's why I asked.
Put that way, because of the stealth creeping up on us. Right. Here we are, most of us in this room have voluntarily bought a tracker that can probably record us, it knows where we are, and still we have it. We love it, actually. And it's very interesting when you look at the dystopias of the past. Brave New World in 1984, from which I got the title of my book, 2084.
Coming out in a couple of weeks, an updated version
this is
of which?
The new one is out November the 18th. But it was interesting that what Orwell said, that we would fear the technology that would overrun us. And Huxley said we would love it. And it seems to me both things are happening simultaneously. We fear it and we love it. But the transhumanism idea, the enhancing of humans, it seems to me that we can work a little bit backwards. Why I got into this whole business was through that, because it affects the concept of what it means to be human. And it seems to me that the biblical teaching on what it means to be human, humans made in the image of God, is something that Christians need to emphasize, because it gives us huge value. The heavens, and I'm an amateur astronomer, declare the glory of God, but they weren't made in his image. You were. And that gives us tremendous value. And anything that undermines that. Now, what would undermine that? More than reprogramming the basic center of what defines the human germline from generation to generation. And C.S. Lewis saw that what would be produced would be subhuman. He said what in the end will be produced are artifacts. So they'll be below human. And he's got this chilling sentence: the final triumph of science, of that kind of science, will be the abolition of man. In other words, taking away that central meaning. And so enhancements that help us, like built-in stents or glasses and all this kind of thing, that's one thing. It's another thing to reprogram all the generations to come. So a group of scientists sitting in the 21st century specify all that follow them. That's what I think is the end product of evil. And on this question, Yuval Noah Harari is not a scientist. He's an Israeli historian, but he's written a couple of very influential books, Sapiens and Homo Deus. And the second one, Homo Deus, really shows us what is going on. It's a very ancient desire to be God. You'll read about it in Genesis 3. And Harari is quite open about it. And he says that in the 21st century, the two major agenda items are these. One, to solve the problem, as he calls it, of physical death. And we'll solve it by technological means, because it's a purely technological problem. Secondly, to enhance the experience of human happiness by bioengineering, by drugs, by all kinds of things like that. And when people come along to me with that agenda, I smile at them and I say, "You're too late." And they say, "But we haven't really started yet." I said, "You're absolutely too late." "How are we too late?" Well, I said, the problem of physical death was solved 20 centuries ago when God raised Jesus Christ from the dead. And the idea of the enhancement of human happiness was solved by the same event, because Jesus offers to anybody who trusts him forgiveness, peace with God, and a new life. So you're too late, folks. It has all been seen. And I must say, the biggest upgrade and uploading is going to occur when we don't see through a glass darkly, but we see face to face. And I think as Christians, we need to be these days spending a lot more thought on what exactly we're expecting in terms of the return of Christ.
John, I think that we could speak for many, many hours to come.
We could.
And it would be a pleasure to do so, but unfortunately time is against us. Maybe I can just ask you to kind of give us a little bit of a summary, because that felt very hopeful, at least in the eternal view. But in the short to medium, what are you hopeful for when it comes to how this technology might enable us to release the gospel in a broader way?
Well, I think it is already helping us. I mean, just in my lifetime, as you heard, I'm 81 today. Now, when I grew up, there was no internet. And the biggest number of people I could speak to was, say, 100 people in a church. And yet, not long ago, I spoke to something like 50,000 people in Latin America. The facilitation of social media, Zoom, and all that kind of thing, if we use these things ethically as Christians, we can use them as tools. I often say the difficulty with technology is the difficulty with just a knife. A sharp knife can be used for surgery or it can be used for murder. Let's make sure we use these knives for surgery.
That's so good. John, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Would you please give a great welcome and thanks to John Lennox.